Out of nowhere, the Dbacks swoop in to sign one of the best pitchers in baseball, Corbin Burnes. Welcome in to an emergency edition of Fantasy Baseball today on Saturday, December 28th. I am Frank Stampfl, joined by Chris Towers, here to break down two major moves. Corbin Burnes signing with the Dbacks. Teoscar Hernandez is headed back to the Dodgers. And Burnes to the Dbacks again from the top rope, out of nowhere. Just the Dbacks swoop in and get their guy here. One of the best pitchers in baseball. 6 years, $210 million is the deal. Doesn't get the $250 million that Corbin Burnes was looking for, but he did get a higher AAV in this deal, $35 million per year. That is currently fifth highest among starting pitchers, behind Zach Wheeler, Jacob deGrom, Blake Snell, and Garrett Cole. Love this move for the D-backs. We mostly heard the Giants and Blue Jays were interested, but they go in and just build a huge strength of a rotation here out in Arizona. Chris, for fantasy, Burnes will have tremendous run support. The D-backs just led all of baseball in runs scored by a lot. It's a solid park to pitch in. What do you think about the fit in Arizona?
There weren't many situations that Corbin Burnes could have gone to that would have been better than Baltimore, or at least as good as Baltimore, and I think he found one. You look at the parks, and one thing that'll stand out if you look at the StatCast park factors is Chase Field is the fifth best park in baseball for offense, and Camden Yards is only 18th. And so you might think, oh, that's a pretty big park downgrade. Not really. It's a 99 park factor for Camden Yards, 101 for Arizona. So neither is on the extreme end of things. They both have a tendency to suppress power, and they both have a tendency to boost other types of extra base hits. Arizona does that slightly more, but all in all, I think it's a negligible park downgrade, especially with the changes that Baltimore was making to their left field fences that were probably going to make it play a little more neutral. So it might even be that he's getting a park upgrade based on those changes. But I think the supporting cast is actually maybe a somewhat significant upgrade for Corbin Burnes. When you look at last year, Arizona, depending on what defensive metric you look at, you can get a result from the seventh best offense in baseball to the seventh best defense in baseball, to the second best defense in baseball in Arizona last year. Baltimore, more middle of the pack, so I think it's an upgrade there. And then, look, Baltimore was fourth in runs scored last year. It was a great lineup. The Orioles scored it's early for me.
For both of us.
The Diamondbacks scored 100 more runs than the Orioles last season. Now, Adley Rutschman had a down year, but they are losing Anthony Santander, replacing him with Tyler O'Neill. Who knows if that's, it could be a net neutral move, but Tyler O'Neill misses a lot of time. Arizona really hasn't lost anyone. I guess Christian Walker, but they replaced him with Josh Naylor. So I think that's pretty close to a neutral move for them. So I think you look at this, and I didn't move Corbin Burnes up in my rankings because, frankly, there's just nowhere for him to move up. But I think this is about as good of a landing spot as you could have hoped for. And I think Corbin Burnes might have figured some things out at the end of last season that could make him even better than he was last year.
Yeah, I think that last point is probably a bigger talking point for Corbin Burnes than anything else related to his environment, right? Mm-hmm. Burnes is one of the most reliable workhorses in the game. He's thrown 190-plus innings 3 years in a row, but his strikeout rate has dwindled. His K percentage the last 4 seasons, 35.6%, 30.5%, 25.5%, and then down to 23% this past season. So I could see Corbin Burnes being a bit of a polarizing pitcher heading into 2025. You mentioned an adjustment that he made, and in August, he kind of made a mechanical adjustment to get his cutter back on track. And then he had a great September. So It's a small sample size, but how much do you put into that, Chris? Do you trust drafting Corbin Burnes as a top 5 starting pitcher in fantasy heading into next season?
Yeah, so let's get into the specifics of what happened, because there's a great piece from the Baltimore Banner last September where he talked about, he was blunt, really, about it in a way that you don't see. It's one of my favorite quotes from last year. He's talking about the cutter, and the reason he threw the cutter was because he could never throw a good 4-seam fastball. And he made that change in 2019, I think, and that really helped his career take off. And he said, my August probably cost me another Cy Young award. Like, that's how good of a season Corbin Burnes was having last year. And he said, quote, I was getting too efficient with how I was spinning it, which was making it a bleepy four-seam fastball. And it was getting hit like a bleepy four-seam fastball. You can fill in the bleep on your own there. But basically what happened was he was getting more rise on his cutter and less horizontal movement. And so it kind of ended up in between the cutter and a four-seamer, which is not a good place to be. He was doing a good job locating it, getting soft contact earlier in the season, but it just got crushed in August, and he realized something had to change. So he changed the grip or the spin or whatever on the cutter, and all of a sudden the horizontal break, he was getting about 4 inches of horizontal break in September. It was more like 2 inches. Prior to that, he was getting less rise, more drop on the pitch. And all of a sudden, the whiff rate was up from 19% for the season to 26%, while the expected WOBA allowed was just 256. Those were both the best marks for any month. So understanding that it is a small sample size and that whatever went wrong with the cutter could go wrong again. The fact that Corbin Burnes was able to identify what went wrong, fix it mid-season, and then ride that to a really good finish of the season, I think bodes really well. Yes, I would take him as a top 5 starting pitcher. I would take him as a top 4 starting pitcher. He is my number 4 starting pitcher. I have Tarek Skubal. Like, he doesn't have, I think even he's probably not going to get the cutter back to 2021 levels, certainly. And so I don't think he has the strikeout upside Tarek Skubal and Paul Skeens have. Mm-hmm. I think Zach Wheeler has shown fewer limitations over the past couple of seasons, so I will also rank Zach Wheeler ahead of him. I'll take Corbin Burnes over everyone else. I've got him just ahead of Logan Gilbert. I've got him just ahead of Chris Sale, Cole Reagans, Garrett Crochet. I am all in. I think he is one of the safest bets for 200 strikeouts. I think he's one of the safest bets for 15 wins. There's not a lot to dislike about Corbin Burnes based on this landing spot and the improvement he showed at the end of last season.
And it's, despite the strikeouts being down, the numbers have still been there the past couple of years for Corbin Burnes. This past season, a 2.92 ERA, a 1.10 WHIP. In 2023, it was a 3.39 ERA and a 1.07 WHIP. With that being said, some of the underlying ERA estimators don't necessarily agree. I mean, this past season, it was a 3.55 FIP, 3.75 Sierra. The year before, he was, up in the high 3s, the low 4s, and some of those marks. So I can see people starting to
absolutely
have concerns about some of those things, and maybe they fade him as a top 5 starting pitcher as a result. I'm closer to you. I don't really want to use a top 3 round pick on a pitcher heading into 2025, but I did an NFBC draft, a 12-team league, where I got him in the 4th round. And I think if you could do that, his ADP right now is 36. So it's not crazy to say you can get Corbin Burnes at the 3-4 turn. Even if you have concerns, I think getting him at that point is totally fine value. So
I might have also drafted him in the one league that I'm playing out. Yeah, he was my first pitcher taken. So yeah, I think I'm going to end up with him on quite a few of my teams. I did take him in the 3rd round, but it was a 15-team league, so it ended up being about the 40th pick. So I'm with you. Like, I don't love a top 36 pick. I'd rather get, my 2 really good hitters locked in before that. But yeah, if he's going to fall outside of the top 35, I'm perfectly happy to take Corbin Burnes as my ace. I think he's very much that anchor for your rotation who can, not just give you really good ratios, which I expect, but the volume is going to be there in a way that you can't really. I think Zach Wheeler is the only pitcher in the top, I don't know, maybe in the entire player pool that I really expect more volume from than Corbin Burnes. That's a big deal. Like, I looked at his injury history, and since he got to the majors, I think he had a shoulder injury like in 2018, way back before he was established. He had a left oblique injury in 2020 that cost him a couple of starts. He had COVID in 2021, missed a couple of starts. He hasn't missed a start with an injury since 2020, though. Like that's a track record no pitcher can match at this point. Even Zach Wheeler had that, was it a shoulder injury at the beginning of the 2023 season. So yeah, I think he's about as rock solid as a starting pitcher can get.
The NFBC ADP in December mentioned it's 36.2 for Burnes. He's the SP6 off the board, currently going behind Garrett Crochet.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this on the most recent podcast. I can't justify that price for Crochet. I get it. I think he's awesome, but I'd rather. I think you're going to have a much easier time building a rotation out around Corbin Burnes than Garrett Crochet.
Yep. What about Corbin Burnes versus Chris Sale?
Look, Chris Sale was so good last year that I do think there's to a certain extent, he's being a little underrated. Ended the season with back injury. The vibes are not great given how many injuries he's had in the past, but like we've talked a lot about how fluky those injuries were. One of them was a bicycle accident. So I do think there's a decent argument to be made that I am undervaluing Chris Sale as my number 6 SP. So I can see that. I'd still rather have Burnes. It's just a little bit safer.
Yeah, I agree there. I currently rank Corbin Burnes ahead of Chris Sale. I have Burnes at SP5. I would take Logan Gilbert over him.
That's reasonable.
There's a little bit more youth there.
It's a one spot difference in my overall rankings. I don't have a strong opinion on that one.
Yep, agreed. Let's take a quick break. When we return, we'll talk about this a little bit more from just a baseball perspective. Updated D-backs rotation. What are the Orioles doing? We'll talk about that right after this. Welcome back in. The D-backs signed Corbin Burnes on a 6-year, $210 million deal. Their updated rotation, Burnes up at the top, followed by Zach Gallen, Merrill Kelly, Eduardo Rodriguez, Brandon Pfaadt, with depth behind those guys. They still have Jordan Montgomery under contract. They have Ryan Nelson, who flashed last season. Gilbert Diaz, who's put up some big numbers in the minors as well. I do wonder if maybe they flip some of this depth. You can never have enough pitching, Chris. So I don't think they have to do that. But if they want to, I've seen on the Twitter streets people talking about Ryan Nelson for Spencer Torkelson, just kind of a flip of young-ish players there. What do you think about the D-backs updated rotation? Do they go out and maybe make another move, trade from their pitching depth now?
Well, I think the more likely one, given their owner's comments at the end of last season, would be to try to salary dump Jordan Montgomery. Yeah. How reasonable or realistic that is a different question, but it's actually pretty funny that the Diamondbacks are the team that ends up signing Corbin Burnes, given their owner's comments about Jordan Montgomery, who is also a Scott Boras client, as Corbin Burnes is. I thought that was an interesting wrinkle, but yeah, I would expect another move. I don't know. I guess DH is still a little bit of a hole for them, although they are a team that does like to mix and match in their lineup. So I don't know if it's the biggest need. Shortstop, if they aren't convinced Jordan Lawler's ready, but I think they're willing to wait for him and just let Geraldo Perdomo go. So it's not a team with a lot of obvious needs, even though it's not necessarily a team that has like star power all up and down the lineup. It's just a deep lineup. It's now a pretty deep rotation. I mean, if they don't trade Montgomery, is he your number 6 starter? Like it's not a bad spot to be in. So I think they've done a really good job. I think, a lot of similarities to when they signed Zach Greinke back, what was that, 9 years ago now, where kind of came out of nowhere, but it starts to make sense when it's like, yeah, we want to take that next step. They've been close the last couple of years. I love the signing for them. I love the signing for Burnes. And yeah, I think there's probably another move or two coming, but I don't know exactly what it is. And we can get to the Orioles. I just don't understand what the Orioles are doing.
Yeah, we'll get to the Orioles in just a second. You mentioned DH could be a possible upgrade for the D-backs. They currently have Pavin Smith penciled in there. They have Blaze Alexander on their bench. They still have Alec Thomas on the bench too. So they have some decent depth there.
And Adrian Del Castillo in the minors, who more than held his own. Obviously, we mentioned Jordan Lawler top, I think he was Scott's top shortstop prospect.
Yeah.
So they're in
a good spot.
I think overall, spot. Yeah, I like what the Diamondbacks are doing right now.
They're in a really good spot. I think maybe the last piece that makes sense is a closer.
Yeah.
And actually, they've come out and kind of talked about, all right, maybe we could bring in a veteran guy. They have Justin Martinez. They have AJ Puck. I think both guys are actually really interesting. I took AJ Puck as like a real, deep draft pick in one of these draft and hold leagues just because he was amazing once he got traded to the Dbacks. But I still think, if they're really trying to compete, maybe they could trade from that depth to bring in a closer or sign one of these.
They were linked to Corbin, or they were linked to Kirby Yates before this signing as well. I wonder if that takes him off the board. But the other thing that I think works out for Corbin Burnes is he got an opt-out after the second year. So like if the next 2 years go well, there's an opportunity to lock in a little more money long-term for him. So I think kudos all around to everyone except for Baltimore here.
Well, let's talk about Baltimore, Chris. I know you have many thoughts on their current situation. They traded for Corbin Burnes last offseason, which at the time kind of felt like a light return for the Milwaukee Brewers. I mean, I think Joey Ortiz could turn out to be a fine player. DL Hall, we haven't really seen much from him, but what are the Orioles doing, Chris?
I don't know, because when they traded for Corbin Burnes last year, it felt like this big turning point for them as an organization. Remember, it came right after the new ownership group bought the team. It was a sign that, hey, we're going for it. They had won 101 games the year before, I believe, but they clearly needed. And the thing after they traded for Corbin Burnes was, you looked at the rotation. I was like, well, Corbin Burnes, Grayson Rodriguez, and then John Means. We don't know what we're going to get from him. Turns out they didn't get much from him. And it just felt like the return for Burnes was so light that like, oh, they're primed to make another big trade for a starting pitcher. And they just didn't. At the deadline, they went and got Zach Eflin, who is now potentially their opening day starter. It's not a good enough rotation. And, they've got this cheap young core that I think they were 24th in baseball in payroll last year. They've got this cheap young core that is the envy of the whole game, right? Like they've got all these great players everywhere who are all cheap, except Adley Rutschman's not a minimum salary player anymore. He's going to make real money for the first time this year. They won 0 playoff games in Adley Rutschman's 3 minimum salary seasons. Like you had one of the biggest edges a team could possibly hope for right there, and you didn't take advantage of it. And now they let Corbin Burnes walk. They'll get a compensation pick, I guess. Good for you. Maybe that'll help in 7 years. Like, I just don't understand. Like, where is the urgency here? I don't like, you've got the squad now. Your window is open and you're going to go into the season with Zach Eflin and Grayson Rodriguez and Dean Kramer as your potential playoff rotation. Like, compare them to the Yankees, compare them to the Red Sox now. Like the Orioles are falling behind their competition at a time when this should be their 2016 Cubs, right? Like this should be their we're going to go out and get John Lester and we're going to build a rotation that can compete in the playoffs. And they're just not doing it. I don't understand what the plan is. They're seemingly going to lose Corbin Burnes and Anthony Santander for nothing this offseason, except for compensation picks. I don't understand what the goal is, but it doesn't appear to be win as many games and win a World Series. And that is frustrating for a team that is clearly close enough to go out and make some big moves. Like what Kobe Mayo is just going to be at AAA to start the season. Like we're going to do that again. We're going to have like major league caliber players sitting at AAA waiting for their chance when you have holes on the major league roster. I'm completely flummoxed by what the Orioles plan is. I don't know what the vision is here, and it's incredibly frustrating because this is a team that should be going all in right now for the next 5 years should be the Orioles' time to win a World Series, and there just seems to be no sense of urgency. It's frustrating.
I think they have Gunnar Henderson under team control for another 4 seasons. So that is the window, right? Because
like Gunnar and Adley. You've got Adley has 3 more years of club control left because they called him up on opening day that year or close enough to opening day. Gunnar, I think it's 4 years after this, or this year, 2025 plus 3 more years. So it's like nothing exists outside of 2025, 2026, 2027, 2028. Like, you can't count on like you can't keep counting on developing players. Maybe Jackson Holiday and Kobe Mayo extend the window a little further, but like, this is your chance. This is the time to go for it. And it's so frustrating to watch people complaining about the Dodgers signing people and like, oh, they're deferring money to get an edge. And it's like, why aren't the Orioles doing that? You know, like, it's beyond frustrating to watch a team that is so obviously well positioned just spin their wheels and not take a chance when it's right in front of them. It's like, you can look at the Orioles rotation and see like, oh, what if Zach Eflin gets back to 2023, right? What if Grayson Rodriguez, like we always talk about it, Grayson Rodriguez feels like he should be better. You know, the underlying, the pitches are all look really good and they're just not leading to ace results yet. But what if he takes just that little step forward? I can see that. What if Trevor Rogers goes to driveline this offseason like he's talked about and gets that velocity back to 2021 levels and starts blowing guys away? What if Tomoyoki Sagano has like a Shota Imanaga type rookie season as another soft tossing command lefty, or he's not a lefty, but NPB import? Like, you can talk yourself into, yeah, a lot of things can go right for this team. They've still got, you know, they still won 91 games last year. There's still a lot to like, but what if everything goes right with our pitchers is not a plan?
Mm-hmm.
Because with pitchers, things go wrong a lot more often than they go right. Like, it's more likely that two of those guys get hurt than that all four of them just have the best case scenario. And it seems like they're building a team for the best case scenarios, and that's not a strategy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, man. Mike Elias did a great job putting this core together, but there just seems to be no sense of urgency to take the next step, and that's frustrating to watch.
Yeah, lots of what ifs for the Orioles. Now, I will say the offseason is not over, and
it's not
linked to Dylan Cease and Luis Castillo, and those would be great pickups. Like Luis Castillo, kind of in the decline. He's not a Corbin Burnes. Dylan Cease would absolutely be a great get.
Oh yeah, you know what would be even better though? Corbin Burnes and Dylan Cease.
Yeah,
there's no reason they couldn't do that. Again, I think they were 24th in payroll last year. Like, they haven't spent any money since like 2019 or 2018. All right, we'll move on.
I hear you. Let's talk about the Dodgers. They are bringing back Teoscar Hernandez on a 3-year, $66 million deal. The rich get richer. You've heard that before. They also signed Blake Snell this offseason.
Mm-hmm.
Teoscar Hernandez, 32 years old, just had a career year with the Dodgers. 272 batting average, 33 home runs, 99 RBI, 12 steals, 840 OPS. The best he's looked since that awesome 2021 with the Blue Jays. Updated Dodgers lineup: Ohtani, Betts, Freeman, Teoscar Hernandez, Max Muncy, Will Smith, Tommy Edman, Michael Conforto, Gavin Lux, I guess. This is the clear best landing spot for Teoscar Hernandez. And Chris, I think he's currently undervalued. His ADP is 73.5 as the 19th outfielder off the board.
Yeah, and we talk about it a lot, how in these very early drafts, a lot of them are draft and holds and stuff like that. So people tend to be cautious when it comes to injuries and playing time and landing spots because there's so much uncertainty. I kind of always felt like Teoscar was going back. Like, all indications were that that's what he wanted more than anything. This ended up being a very reasonable contract for him to come back. You know, second best corner outfielder on the market, signs for 3 years, $66 million. That's a pretty good landing. That's a pretty good get for the Dodgers. So I've been confused as to why his price has been so low all throughout the process this offseason. And yeah, I agree. He is, what's his ADP, like 75?
73.5, 19th outfielder.
Yeah, he's my number 63 player, number 17 outfielder. So I expect he'll move up closer to where I have him now that he's signed, and he should. You know, he was a top 10 outfielder last season. The RBI, it's kind of like pretty solid production across all 5 categories, but only really a standout in home runs and RBI. But like, he won't hurt you anywhere, and he'll help you in home runs and RBI. He's 32, so there is a chance that, like, yeah, maybe there's a drop-off coming, but we haven't really seen it. The one exception being that year in Seattle where he talked about not being able to see the ball. We have the proof of concept that, okay, no, that was an issue, and he's much better away from Seattle, which he has been throughout his career. So I think there's a ton to love about this landing spot. And if the price ends up around 70, I will be buying Teoscar Hernandez.
Yeah, I do agree. I don't think he's bulletproof by any means. There are some warning signs in the plate discipline. There always have been. He chases a lot. Zone contact is below average for Teoscar Hernandez. And I think the most likely scenario is that he does take a little bit of a step back. If you look at his steamer projection, 257, 30 home runs, 8 steals, 780 OPS. I think maybe the OPS could be a little bit higher, but
yeah, I think the batting average is a little low.
Yeah, 800 OPS bat, 260, 30 homers, 8 to 10 steals. That seems like a pretty fair projection for Teoscar Hernandez. How much do you think the ADP moves up? You mentioned you have him 63rd overall in your rankings. Can you see him climbing all the way up to Wyatt Langford and James Wood? Those are currently going between picks 50 and 55. Do you think Teoscar Hernandez can get that high?
So I guess I'm just a little lower on James Wood and Wyatt Langford. He's in between them in my rankings, but I have Wood 62 and Langford 66 with Teoscar Hernandez 63 in the Roto rankings. So I guess I'm just a little lower on those two guys, but yeah, I think that's the range. You know, that's the right range of outfielders for him to be going around.
The fallout for the rest of the Dodgers, obviously not good news for Andy Pages. Early drafters like myself who were kind of interested in Andy Pages, has the prospect pedigree. The barrel rate looked pretty good this past season, but it looks like at best he'll be a short side platoon bat to start the season. Obviously injuries can always happen, and maybe Andy Pages works his way into more playing time. And Dalton Rushing, Chris. I mean, I know there's a lot of people who are interested in him for fantasy because the bat is absolutely ready. Premium exit velocities in the minors. It looks like if he was on any other team, he can be like a top 12, top 15 catcher right away for fantasy. But the Dodgers have Will Smith. They tried him out in the outfield last season. Maybe that happens. But now the outfield is all filled up for the Dodgers too. So I just don't really know how it's going to happen for either Pages or Rushing without an injury.
Yeah, and the problem is those guys are just corner guys, just like Teoscar is. And like you could see, they could move Mookie to second base and Tommy Edman to shortstop. And, there could be a role at center. Dalton Rushing's not going to play center field. I mean, I don't know, maybe, but it seems pretty unlikely. He's been just a corner guy. Pages has played a little bit of center field. But like that really limits it. And, Conforto has missed some time in his career. Teoscar Hernandez is on the older side. So it's not that hard to see, some movement that creates an opportunity, but as of opening day, it doesn't look like there's an everyday role for Rushing or Pedro Pages, and that's tough. Andy Pages, sorry.
Anything else?
Pedro Pages actually will play pretty regularly.
I think so for the St. Louis Cardinals. Anything else on either deal on all fronts? Corbin Burnes to the Dbacks, Teoscar Hernandez back to the Dodgers.
The Orioles can't be done. Whatever it is, I don't know what the next move is, but they need to be much more aggressive than they have been so far. Dodgers seem pretty set, right? Like maybe they bring in another reliever, but otherwise, we'll see on Roki Sasaki. I guess that's the one big looming thing, but they've got 6 viable starting options for opening day right now. Clayton Kershaw will eventually sign with them, so they will have 7 whenever he's healthy. We're looking at a dynasty here, folks.
Yes, we are. We're going to wrap there. For Chris, I am Frank. Thanks as always for tuning in to Fantasy Baseball today. Please make sure to follow and leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify, and we will be back again next week. Bye-bye.